Howdy mates, here's a part 2 video over at the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. So we are now really in that old growth cypress forest. And just listen for a second. Hear all that chirping? You know, you're hearing some different varieties like red-bellied woodpecker, the Carolina wren, and even some warblers. Probably would be northern Parula warbler, except those are a little hard to find just because they tend to stay way higher up in the canopy of the trees. So it is noted that Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary has one of the world's largest old cypress growth. So you could say, it wouldn't surprise me if this particular park is listed under the Old Growth Forest Network. And like I said in my last video, we're still a little bit in the spring, but we will soon be transitioning towards summer. And I just wanted to point this out too. You see this plant right here? See how it kind of like branches multiple times? So like you have your main stem, branches off, and then on that branch you have alternating leaves. Well, that is known as royal fern. And it's actually known to be some of the oldest types of ferns too. And it's one of the only few where it has that bipinnate leaf arrangement. So it splits off twice, which you did see there. There aren't many ferns that have that particular pattern. So like, let me show you an example. So like here, we've got some swamp fern. And as you can see, in this instance, you only see the opposite or alternating leaves on the main stem, and that's it. That's a pretty common pattern among our ferns. And for another, you know, when you group all of our ferns together, they do belong to seedless vascular plants. So they don't reproduce by seed, but rather they reproduce by means of spores, which, in a sense, it gets a little complicated, you know, in terms of plant reproduction, but spores are a little similar to pollen. Except the thing is, spores, they contain that male and female genotypes, whereas pollen, on the other hand, is only present from seedless plants, seeded plants, or angiosperms. And the pollen is basically only the male gametophyte. I know I say all that terminology. So when I say gametophyte, that essentially describes the gender of that cell. So like, you have a male gametophyte, and you have a female gametophyte. Now it gets, that's botany for you. But anyways, ferns are some of the oldest known groups of plants. They basically existed even before trees. So, that being said, they've coexisted with dinosaurs, as it were. But anyway, the point of this video is really, we're in essentially a swamp right now, which is basically just saying a forested wetland. And such an ecosystem like this is extremely crucial. You know, wetlands had so many misconceptions for decades. You know, they were believed to be places of decay, rot, and just a nuisance. But as a matter of fact, wetlands are completely the opposite. Wetlands are crucial for preventing runoff or erosion, you know, after rainfall occurs. They can serve as a reservoir when it does rain. And the wetlands, essentially, they are nature's water purification system. So let's say you have nutrient content in your water. The different plants that inhabit our wetlands can use those nutrients that is present in the water, which can include nitrate and phosphate, among other nutrients too, such as potassium. And with that decay that I was just mentioning, that is contributing to the formation of new soil as well. So you can clearly start to see that the pros are outweighing the cons. And our wildlife heavily relies on these ecosystems. Without them, they can't survive. Now, granted, it may look like it is a little dry here, but I'm sure that there are some spots in this swamp that have very shallow bodies of water. And that is actually very important for our wading birds, because they need to feed on the different mosquito fish, for example, or even crayfish for another. Oh, just saw a pileated woodpecker. Oh, maybe. There he is. So that's really the point, is those swamps may not necessarily have the most appeal to a lot of people. That doesn't speak on my behalf. We need them. So that's the point. Because it may not look necessarily aesthetic for someone, does not mean that it's not being useful. And that is something we need to get past. And that's honestly really the main point. One of the main points of why I even provide these videos is so that we can get that connection again. You know, get that understanding, as it were. Because usually once we take the time to understand something is when we start to care. And when we start to care is when we protect. So, anyway, you guys should visit here if you haven't yet. Alright, take care, you guys. See ya.